Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast. Episode number 160, presented by Marshall Communications, creator of the Marshall Plan 65-step strategic planning process. For those of you new to the show, I'm your host, Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications, and I want to welcome you all. And today we have a very special episode because we're doing a live broadcast from Grippy Tannins on Middle Street in Portland, Maine, which happens to be kind of like my second living room. I love coming here, and I'm so happy to have some of our special friends and guests here today. And also with us today is Peter Koch, who had the most popular episode over the past year. So welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, Peter.
Thanks, Nancy. I really appreciate being here. And it's a great honor to have been heard that many times on your podcast. Pretty awesome.
Well, your other episode was heard so many times, and hopefully this one will be too. So Peter has had this is hard to believe, you're so young. You started working evidently when you were 1, because you have had over 36 years of experience in the New England recreation industry, including 20 years spent either working or in managing many aspects of the ski industry. And this is just one of the things that Peter and I have in common, because as many of you know, I came out of the ski industry as well. So Peter's experience in this diverse industry gives him a wide range of knowledge in almost all categories of business insured by MEMIC. And at MEMIC, Peter is the safety management consultant and manager of digital technology. He is an authorized instructor in both the OSHA 10-hour construction and the OSHA general industry outreach training programs, and he teaches workshops for MEMIC ranging from safety leadership and ergonomics to fall protection and high angle rescue. He is also the host of the Safety Experts podcast, and that's one of the things we want to talk about today.
Yeah, excited for that.
So Peter, congratulations on having the most popular of all the PR Maven podcasts for my 3rd year.
Thanks, Nancy. It's been a pleasure to be on, and it was fun talking to you the first time, and I'm excited for tonight.
Well, it's even better because we didn't have wine the first time.
We did not. I like this living room thing.
Yeah, me too. It's pretty awesome. So we talked about the evolution of the Safety Expert podcast. Tell us about it.
So it's an interesting story, but I imagine other people who might have a podcast has a similar story, but it really started over a conversation over coffee with Rod Stanley at McDonald's. And we were talking about how people consume information, and especially safety information. So traditionally, it's always been a pamphlet or a book or a video that you gain from somebody, but you don't always do it that way. Like, there's plenty of opportunities to learn something new about a subject, and it's not always from a book. And so Rod had the idea of, how about a podcast? And we were talking about that and thought it might be interesting. We did a proof of concept, just a couple of recordings, sent it over to communications, and they supported us. And Carl Siegfried, our VP of Loss Control, supported it a lot, and we started the podcast, and we're up to, I think, episode 60 now. We do one every 2 weeks, so we try to keep it moving.
Well, that's awesome. And I know for myself, I like to multitask. I can't do just one thing at a time, so I like to listen to podcasts while I'm driving, or if I happen to be cleaning or something that's sort of monotonous. And I think that's one of the reasons podcasts have become so popular.
So that I do the same thing. I tend to listen to things when I'm mowing a lawn or I'm doing something that my brain can attach to something else. And I learned plenty of stuff from it. A lot of the things that I've actually learned or gained to help the podcast go, like audio technology and things. Like you listen to podcasts sometimes and you learn a new thing about it.
That's right. Yeah. I feel like there's something about the intimacy of audio. And like I listen to Guy Raz, How I Built This. That's one of my favorite podcasts. So I listen to that a lot. So Peter, tell us about MEMIC and what you do there.
Sure. So MEMIC is a monoline insurance carrier. We write workers' comp only, so just workers' comp insurance. And we have a number of different facets within our business. We do underwriting. We have a great claims team. And then the group that I'm involved with is loss control. And so we partnered together to really work with different customers and policyholders to make a safe work environment. Like our goal out there is to help customers be as safe as possible. And we hire experts to do that. So in loss control, we have almost 40 experts. So we come from all different industries. We have someone who has their doctorate in environmental health and safety. And we have people like myself who came out of an industry that serve an industry. So when I started working for MEMIC, the majority of my accounts, and still the majority of my accounts, are ski areas because that's where my background came from. So we really feel that having that expertise within MEMIC can help the businesses be better at workplace safety. Because at the end of the day, we want those employees who work for our policyholders to go home safe.
Exactly. And now more than ever, all employers need to be sure that their employees come back to work.
Yeah, really.
Right? So they have to be safe.
They really do. And if you're out with an injury, as the employer, you not only have to find someone else to do that particular job, but then you think about all the training that needs to be done that you did with that person to bring them around. There's a lot of time and effort that you invested into that particular individual. It doesn't matter if it's McDonald's or the farm or you're a wind turbine mechanic or you're working in the mill. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of time and effort and energy put in that individual to bring them up to speed, to make them a good employee. And when they're injured, it takes them out of the team. And it not only changes the work, but it changes that person too. They can't do the things that they want to do or they like to do outside of work. Because life isn't always about work, right?
Really?
Imagine that.
I can't imagine. As somebody who's had her own business for 31 years, it's like, but no, I try to find some other things.
You still find some opportunities to get out there and go, yeah.
So MEMIC came to Nancy Marshall Communications for help in creating a strategy for the Safety Experts podcast. Can you tell how we worked together and how it benefited your company?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a great partnership. And when we went to communications and said, hey, we're going to do a podcast. And they were like, you're going to do a podcast? I'm like, yeah, we're going to do a podcast. We want some help doing a podcast. And Kelly Barden was like, hey, Nancy Marshall at Marshall Communications, we got a good group. They can come and help us. So we did, you came and Greg came and we sat down. It was Rod, myself, Jesse, Randy, a number of people sat down together and talked with you about what our strategy was, what we wanted to do, why we wanted to have the podcast. And you took all that information in with a few meetings, came back, refined that information, and you came back with the Marshall Plan for us to start the podcast. And it had a ton of great information about all the steps that we needed to follow. And it helped us steer in a couple of different directions, and it helped us affirm that we were on the right track in some other directions. So it was really awesome to have that and to know that if we got stuck, we can go back to that plan and go, so what part of the plan didn't we follow? And we noticed that a couple of times around the technology. You helped us with learning about the technology, how to what we needed to record, different services that we could use, how to get the podcast out of the computer and into the airwaves. That was another pretty cool thing that you helped us with. And then metrics. How do you know that a podcast is successful? And what's the plan? Where do you start to look to see how it could be successful? So that was all stuff that you helped with. Pretty awesome partnership.
Well, we enjoyed it. And of course, as part of the Marshall Plan process, we had 3 meetings and we were able to really dig deep into all aspects of not only producing it, but promoting it too, because what good is a podcast if nobody knows about it?
True,
So
very true.
we were able to help you think through how to promote it through social media and also all of your ongoing communications with your customers and employees.
Yeah, and it's an interesting part because it's not the typical podcast where we're trying to make money off of this. The concept was really, how do we help people consume information about safety in their spare time if they have an interest, and bring it to them in a way that's different than grabbing a book or a pamphlet that might give you 5 steps for how to set up your chair better at your office. We can talk about that in the podcast with some really interesting people and make it more intimate and more fun for someone to consume.
Yeah, one thing I have found with the PR Maven podcast is I can contact people and ask them to have a half hour or 40-minute conversation with me, that people that would never give me the time of day, but if I'm going to put it out on a podcast, they'll talk to me. So that's been pretty fun. And it puts you into the world of what I call content marketing, which is kind of the whole way that marketing is going now. And you talked about all the experts you have at MEMIC, and producing content and putting it out on the internet and making it findable is really the best way now to differentiate your business.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's as I look at our podcast, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and sometimes there's opinions out there. And our job really is to bring the expertise. Like, we're not talking about opinion. It's the fact that if you fall 6 feet onto a hard surface, you're going to get hurt. And these are the things that you can do to help protect yourself from that. So there's some factual stuff out there. It's not an opinion piece. We're looking out for the experts to really give some really creative solutions about how to keep your employees safe.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. And as I said, right now, employers really need their employees to come back to work. So we're going to take a short break now. We actually have a video to share from Michael Bourque, who's the president and CEO of MEMIC, who wasn't able to be here with us tonight. So he recorded a little video.
That's great. He's been a phenomenal supporter of this whole process too. We really couldn't do without him.
Well, he's a PR person and journalist from way back.
Very
so that helps. So here we go with Mike Bourque.
Hi, everyone. Michael Bourque from MEMIC. Sorry I can't join you tonight. Nancy, thanks for the invitation. I'm sure you all know a few years ago when MEMIC was looking for better ways to share some of the content that we develop from our safety team, we decided to try our own podcast and to really find the expert. We went to Marshall Communications for Nancy and her team, who really helped us to develop the Safety Experts podcast, hosted by our own Peter Koch. Recently this year, Peter joined Nancy for one of her PR Maven podcasts, and he's the most popular guest of the 3rd year. Congratulations, Peter. I got to tell you, he's one of the more popular people here at MEMIC too. Peter's fantastic. He's become known with his smooth production and smooth question asking as Peter NPR Koch here at MEMIC. Pete, want to say congratulations. Nancy, thank you so much for all your help. Hope everybody has a great time tonight. Sorry I'll be missing you.
So welcome back. And we're here with Peter Koch, who's from MEMIC, and he's the winner of the PR Maven Golden Microphone Award for being the most popular guest for the 3rd season of the podcast. And Peter, what are all the other aspects involved in the podcast other than just interviewing guests?
Oh my gosh, there's so much. So you have a podcast, an episode that might run, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour sometimes, and you think that's all that there is, but there's so much more to do. So you've got to find the guest, reach out to them, have a planning call with them to make sure that they have an idea about what to talk about, and then figure out some questions to help them, because sometimes there's a great guest out there and they have all the knowledge, but you need to help them with some of the questions to help me ask the right questions so you get the story out of them. And then there's the production side of it and all the technology that goes into that part. There's research about the topic, and if you're not actually the expert on the topic, to figure all that out, and then getting it all out to the world and making sure it sounds good and it drops on the right dates and people can access it. So there's many different aspects of doing it. It's not just the 20 minutes or 30 minutes that you might have on air, so to speak. And there's a bunch of people that help. So I know Rod Stanley, who's here tonight, he does a lot of work for me on the the kind of the producer side to help wrangle guests together and give me some context so that we can have some conversations. And then Jesse Potter is the engineer. So he does all the editing and the sound engineering around that sound design. So we're playing a little bit with that sometimes too. We did a slip and fall episode where when we were talking about how the slip and fall would happen, he added some footsteps in there and some slipping steps. So really trying to make it a more robust
And
experience.
somebody screaming in agony when they're
Not
done.
quite there. No, we didn't quite get there. But all of that goes into that. So there's a team that makes this happen. It's not just me. So that microphone and the award that we have there really needs to be shared with all the rest of the people that help make this happen.
Well, that's why I'm glad that you brought many members of your team here tonight. It's nice to recognize them all. And, one thing that I don't think many marketers who haven't discovered podcasting realize is that it really strengthens the relationship between the host and the guest.
Sure does.
So, I mean, you and I probably might not have really gotten to know each other were it not for podcasting.
No, it might have been just on the slope and said, "Hey, Nancy, how you doing?"
But we've discovered that we have so much in common, including Otis Ridge ski area, where I used to go to junior ski camp. And
alma mater almost, right?
Right. So it is really remarkable how podcasting helps strengthen a lot of different relationships. And, I get listeners from all over the world. Literally, I have a listener who's in British Columbia, Canada, who emails me every time
Oh, wow.
I put out a podcast, and he shares some writing that he does, and that's somebody I never would have known. So it's very good for relationship building.
That's
in
fantastic.
my opinion.
It's a really good point. And you're right, there's a lot of relationships that do come out of these podcasts. It's awesome.
Yeah. So, Peter, is there a book, an app, a website, or a person who has influenced you in your career and your life, and why?
Wow. Okay. So this was it's a really great question, and I guess there's I'm going to go to the book thing.
Okay.
I love to read. So it's hard to kind of pare it all down, but there's a book called The Power of Silence by Robert Sara, and it's a really interesting way of recognizing that as busy as we are, because you don't like to be still, neither do I. But when we find that opportunity to think about things after a while, to sit down and reflect, and you come to a better understanding of where you are, who you are, what direction you need to go in, and you understand not only yourself more, but you understand the process better. So it's maybe a little heady book, but it's a pretty fun book.
The Power of Silence by
Robert Sara.
Robert Sara.
Yeah, that's good.
That's when I think I need to read that.
And with 5 girls at home, sometimes you need the power of silence.
Yeah. Peter has 5 daughters, which is pretty remarkable in and of itself. So how can people get in touch with you, Peter?
Sure. So around the podcast, they can just email me at podcast@MEMIC, which is MEMIC.com. So podcast@MEMIC.com, which is the easiest way to get a hold of me, or they can just call MEMIC 207-791-3000, and they can find me that way. So it's hard sometimes to find me. I'm out in the field often. I'm not always in my office, so it's easier to call those places or email, and then we can have a conversation from there.
And they can find the Safety Experts podcast.
They can find that .com/podcast, or you can find that on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, iTunes, any of those places that you get your podcast or consume your podcast from.
That's great. Well, it's been such a pleasure, and cheers. Here's to everybody who's here. Cheers.
Cheers.
It's so nice, and thank you, Lindsay, for hosting us.
Yes, very much.
Have a great day, PR Maven Nation.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the PR Maven Podcast. I invite you to share a review of the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation on Facebook. It's free to join, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you use an Alexa device, use your Alexa app to search the Skills and Games section to find and enable the PR Maven Podcast Flash Briefing. This will give you access to exclusive content and more PR and marketing advice. Thanks again for listening and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.